All right, guys, this is definitely not good when it comes to what's happening with Square Enix because it looks like one of their largest investors, that is the 3D Investment Partners, they are an activist investor that's been steadily increasing their stake in Square Enix since April. They do not like what's happening here. They dropped a 100-page presentation criticizing how the company is managed and rallied other shareholders to do the same. And in this presentation, they completely blasted nearly everything that Square Enix is doing. Now, listen, guys, we know there is no, I would say, secret. There's not a secret that Square Enix has been having some issues selling their flagship IP, which is Final Fantasy. They've had some successes over the years. They've done a lot of crazy things in order to be profitable at times, like blitzing people with mobile game after mobile game, then shutting down those mobile games less than a year later after that to get as much revenue as possible, as quickly as possible over the last decade or so. They've ousted other people that have came in when it comes to presidents, brought in new people, changed business plans. Right now, we're with the new Kiryu business plan that he's doing with the whole medium term to everything. But this is definitely not looking good because the sales numbers have came out and shareholders are not happy. Now, in this shareholder thing that happened here, guys, you have to look at this. They talked about Final Fantasy 16 and how that was a complete disappointment when it comes to surprising and I would say like entertaining the long-term fans. They said this about Final Fantasy 16: low quality that betrays fan expectations. The turn-based and active time battle systems that fans love have been replaced. The music, which FF is famous for, is replaced by generic orchestral cinematic fantasy strings the whole time. Why Square Enix don't listen to fans remains the eternal question. All in all, Final Fantasy 16 is heartbreaking for Final Fantasy fans. Man, that is damning to come from a presentation from shareholders. And then check this one out. New IPs have also been harshly criticized. Forspoken, a magical action RPG, a story devoid of charm or immersion, only worth $20 to $25 or skip it. Bad cringe dialogues, bad protagonists, unlikable characters, bad acting, bad pacing, and meh generic story. So essentially what the shareholders did is they went on Metacritic to find user reviews that were terrible and then put it out there. Now, once again, you can't take this as, okay, it's the be-all, end-all when it comes to these games. If you play Forspoken or if you play Final Fantasy 16, obviously there are going to be people that have differences of opinions. But I will say this, when you look at Final Fantasy 16, did it betray some fans out there? Sure. Were some fans expecting something different? Absolutely. I'm a lifetime Final Fantasy fan. I've been playing Final Fantasy for a very long time. And yes, I don't want a pure action-based Final Fantasy game where you use one character and a dog. I mean, that's not necessarily what I want to play as or what I want to do. I want to have my active time battle, my ATB, or my turn-based. I want to be able to have a party in a group and use the magic that type of way. I don't want something like Final Fantasy 16. Now, does that mean that Final Fantasy 16 is a bad game? Absolutely not. But where they're going with this is definitely not necessarily great overall. And if you look at it, the sales have essentially bottomed out. They have not been able to sell more than 4 million or so copies of Final Fantasy 16 from what I understand, maybe from what the shareholders have seen. There was some leaks or some numbers out there. It doesn't seem like Final Fantasy 16 has really sold much more after that first initial blitz of sales at the launch week of the game. I think it's essentially been on ice since then. So their fan base has essentially been frozen out. Their fan base has dwindled. It is evaporated. There is not many people left over from the people that used to buy Final Fantasy back in the day that are still buying Final Fantasy. And those people are still all alive. I mean, if you grew up in the 80s or if you grew up in the 90s and you were playing video games and you're still alive at this point, there's a disconnect from those people that have been playing Final Fantasy from the PS1 era that are now adults and now decide not to play Final Fantasy anymore. Now, I still play it, but there's a lot of people who are obviously not playing Final Fantasy, and that is a huge problem for Square Enix. I've identified a couple different reasons why this happened. I do think that, yes, some of the fans were expecting an ATB turn-based and kind of evolve it. They want to see the graphics and tech get better, and they also want to see them evolve from what they did, but they don't want to see them completely change the battle system to the point to where it feels like Devil May Cry, or it feels like Bayonetta at times, or it feels like a complete action game. They want it to be how they had it before, but then, of course, new scenarios, new things, and once again, I get it. I understand not everybody feels the same way with that, but I do think that the dwindling sales of Final Fantasy 16 and even Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, which from what we understand at this point hasn't sold more than 3 or 4 million either, it might be underneath that. They're essentially hitting the same area, even though Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth and Remake have a different battle system than Final Fantasy 16. People still want high-end Final Fantasy with ATB or turn-based type of combat, and that's where you can slot in Expedition 33. I mean, listen, guys, I don't like to bring that up all the time when we talk about Final Fantasy. It's something that I think is funny when it comes down to it, and yes, there's been plenty of other RPGs that have came out that have been great turn-based and have done great. Square Enix has it with Dragon Quest. We've seen strategy RPGs like Fire Emblem, Three Houses, and many other games, Octopath Traveler from Square Enix as well, come in and do great when it comes to turn-based. But when it comes to that big overall big presentation that we know with Final Fantasy and everything, we kind of want to see that. And Expedition 33 came out and kind of filled that gap a little bit, and they sold like 5 million, 6 million copies plus now at this point, and are probably going to sell a lot more after they sweep the Game Awards and people say, okay, I'll finally try this game out. And I think that they're going to continue to sell at a steady clip because of the price of the game, because of the review scores of the game, because of the word of mouth of the game is incredibly positive and good. Even if people don't end up liking Expedition 33 when they play it, it's still one of those things to where people are still going to buy it and say this is the new kid on the block when it comes to big RPGs out there that respect what happened before in the past, but then put a modern coat of paint on there and put some interesting gameplay mechanics that are fun in other games like Mario and Luigi, for example, or Lost Odyssey. So they kind of combine so many different elements into everything, but then put that big presentation of a AAA RPG around it, but in a double A, or I would say not quite super AAA funding thing, you know, because obviously the game is not as long as a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. There's not as much production value as some of these other bigger games, but it didn't need it. All it needed to be was compelling and a great story in addition to cool characters and great combat, and they were able to do really well. So I do think that Square Enix is going to reevaluate what is happening here post Expedition 33, what they're going to do. And I think that Final Fantasy 17, whenever that game does drop, it needs to kind of go back to what fans are expecting. It's not like it's over, guys. Final Fantasy's still here. They can still do better. But I do think that, once again, that deal that they did with PlayStation was also very detrimental because the world is shifting. Japan is shifting. Japan used to sell so many copies of Final Fantasy because the dominant home console or platform was PlayStation back in the day. It was PlayStation 1, it was PlayStation 2, the sales were there. However, in the PS3/PS4 era, that started shifting over to handhelds and started shifting over to a hybrid, the Nintendo Switch. And Square Enix obviously were not going to make their next main big Final Fantasy on the Nintendo Switch, and they signed a deal with PlayStation in order for them to kind of make exclusives or have big timed exclusives. And that, I think, ultimately ended up being one of the downfalls of it, because you need that Japanese base in order to get the sales like they used to get it back in the PS1 era, the PS2 era. You need the biggest base in Japan when it comes to the leader overall, and that's Nintendo Switch 1 and obviously Nintendo Switch 2. And then what did Square Enix do recently? They completely pivoted and said, we're going to be making everything on Nintendo Switch 2 in addition to Xbox, PlayStation, PC, all pretty much at the same time. They've already confirmed that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, in addition to Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, are coming to Xbox and coming to Nintendo Switch 2, so don't worry about that. They always want to assure people they have to launch it ahead of time because they know that things have changed from where it was before. In order to get those massive sales, they're going to have to be multi-platform. They're going to have to support, obviously, Japan, what is the most popular system there. That's the Nintendo Switch 2. So it's one of those things to where we're just going to have to kind of wait and see overall what's happening. But the fact that you have shareholders coming out with 100-page presentation points and criticizing and pulling comments from people and saying all this stuff, this is definitely not a good look, and Square Enix needs to adapt, and they need to adapt quickly. But I'm guessing that Final Fantasy 17 is going to be an ATB or hybrid type of system, even like maybe a Metaphor Refantasio, where maybe you have some action combat and then you break into turn-based, or it's going to be like a modified ATB type of system overall. But they've got to do something when it comes down to that, and they've got to make sure that the quality is there as well, because Final Fantasy 16 has good quality. I think the Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth have good quality, but the fans are just not buying them like they used to buy them, and that is a problem for your flagship IP overall. If you can't sell 4, 5, 6 million copies in today's day overall, with the install bases that we have with these systems and everything, there's definitely a problem. When you have as big of a platform as Steam and all these different stuff, you got to be able to sell more than that. Especially when a brand new IP comes out and outsells you near instantly, you got to make some changes in order to get things done. So I do think that they are going to enact that. So we'll see what happens with that, but I do think that something big is on the horizons, and potentially as quick as the Game Awards this Thursday, depending on when you're watching this. But before we get into that announcement or what potentially could be happening, please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, and click that notification bell to get my videos as soon as they drop. And let me know what you think about Square Enix and what they can do with Final Fantasy in the comment section below. But let's talk about what's happening next with Final Fantasy, because it does seem like there's going to be a Game Awards announcement, because the Game Awards 2025 is just right around the corner this Thursday, which I will be streaming live. So make sure you guys hang out, hit the notification bell, all that good stuff, because I will be streaming. We'll have a pre-show. It's going to be a great stream. But it does seem like a new Final Fantasy game trailer will be there. And the new trailer is likely to be for the third part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake series of games. One eagle-eyed fan noticed that Square Enix currently has one unlisted video in its Final Fantasy YouTube playlist, which suggests that this will be unleashed at the Thursday event. So yeah, it definitely seems like they're going to be doing something here. Final Fantasy has been at Keighley's award shows before, where they've had Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, or they've had whatever remake. They've had different trailers at Keighley's shows. So I would expect Final Fantasy to be at the Game Awards this year, just because it makes so much sense. They've had it at Summer Games Fest and all of that, and it's usually a pretty cool thing to see, like the latest Final Fantasy game. So I know that they've been talking recently about Final Fantasy and Part 3. They said that they've been kind of finalizing different things and all of that. So if we get a trailer at this point, I do think that Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 will probably be ready the following year. So 2027 seems most likely. If we get a trailer at the end of 2025, they'll probably be promoting and talking about it in 2026. And then it'll launch in early 2027, kind of like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. That's what happened there. They kind of promoted it all throughout 2023, and then it launched early 2024. So I'm guessing it's going to be something very similar to that overall, where they promote it all throughout the year. They have different types of things that they're doing with it, and then we get an early 2027 type of launch for that game, which would be awesome. So we can wrap that up, finally finish that saga. We're going on almost a decade by the time that it will release, depending on when it does actually come out, from 2020 all the way to this point. But they originally announced Final Fantasy VII Remake, the first one. They announced that, I think, in like, what, 2015 or something like that, or 2016. I forgot exactly when that game was announced, so I'll have it up on screen for you guys. But yeah, this is going on like a 10-year saga now at this point, from announcement at first, the start of it, all the way now to this point. So 10 plus years or whatever. So I think it's time for this just to come to close, so they can kind of wrap this up. They can get into Final Fantasy 17, and we can find out what they're going to remake or what they're going to do next overall with the Final Fantasy brand. And of course, I'm looking forward to it. I played Final Fantasy 7 Remake Part 1. I played that on the PlayStation 4 Pro back in the day. I thought it was great. I played Rebirth on PS5. I'm looking forward to this one here, but I'm also looking forward to it to being over at this point, so we can move forward. So what do you guys think when it comes down to potential big Final Fantasy announcement at the Game Awards? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other videos like this one here, talking about the big launch sales updates for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, or maybe even some more about some great RPGs to check out on the Nintendo Switch, and of course the Nintendo Switch 2.